So I was kind of expecting this, but my video on Joseph Campbell and the Monomyth has been pretty polarizing. And that's cool. I like it when my videos promote discussion, as long as it doesn't turn into flame wars. A lot of interesting points have been risen, and I'll now be trying my best to address them en masse. Point 1. You never actually give details on the Monomyth. You're absolutely right about this, because that wasn't the point of the video. What I was trying to get at was how fruitless it is to place a certain value on specific story structures. It didn't matter to the point of my video if the Monomyth has a character crossing a threshold or has him sitting on a couch watching Simpson reruns all night. What mattered was that people had put a rather large value to the Monomyth, especially younger and more naive writers who are looking for a template to work from. And really, this applies to pretty much any story structure with an assigned greater value. An example considered even more gospel than the Monomyth is the three-act structure. I could have made a very similar video on that, but the Monomyth was the flavor of choice that week on the internet. But allow me to reiterate something that, based on some of the comments, I guess I wasn't entirely clear on. I'm not saying that the Monomyth, or the three-act structure, or any other kind of storytelling structure is bad in of themselves. I simply consider these things tools for a storyteller to use. You don't open up a toolbox and say that a hammer is better than a screwdriver, or that a pair of pliers is more valuable than a hacksaw. Which tools are utilized depends on what's being built, and no tool is universal for all projects. Telling an apprentice handyman that all you ever need is a ball-peen hammer and a Phillips head screwdriver severely limits what they are capable of constructing. This is bad for creativity and innovation. That was the point of all of this. That said, point 2. What do you mean by elitist, masculine, and Western? These are the three descriptive terms I used for the Monomyth in my video, and some people wanted to know what that was about. Again, the actual details of the Monomyth was not the point, but I guess I'll give it a shot. First, elitist. Perhaps a strong term, but the very first part of the Monomyth concerns itself with the call to adventure, and by Campbell's own words, this is a call of destiny, that of a preordained greatness that is finally coming into action. Neo is prophesied to be the one, Harry Potter is prophesied to be the one, Aang is prophesied to be the one, Buffy is prophesied to be the one. Luke Skywalker has a secret heritage that connects him to the Force, and the Animorphs are the agents of the Elemist. This can promote a level of laziness in writers who have used destiny as a replacement for actual character. You can literally go up to anyone and say they are the hero of the story just because destiny or prophecy or whatever. Luke Skywalker may have had a special family tree and a destiny provided by the Force, but he was also a well-defined character, starting off as a wide-eyed dreamer, frustrated in his place in life, a youthful learning that a lot of people can identify with. On the other hand, Anakin Skywalker is annoying and vapid, a complete shit stain that audiences couldn't care less about. But he's the focus of the films because he was foretold by prophecy. He was the product of immaculate conception, and was apparently more attuned to the Force than even Yoda. Preordained greatness ain't worth squat if the character is shit. Oh, and bullshit preordained greatness is how a lot of leaders throughout the centuries have gained power. From the Pharisees to the Roman emperors to as recent as 2008 with the monarchs in Nepal claiming that they're gods. Plus your hyper-religious politicians who think they are the right hand of God, like, George W. Bush saying God telling him to invade Iraq and all that. And as you can imagine, some serious tyranny went on and is still going on because of this concept. Okay, but what does shitty real life have to do with the Monomyth? Well, consider the people who told these stories Campbell collected and researched. Who are they telling stories to? Well, the people with the money, aka the leaders of the land, aka people who like their egos stroked. There is a practical reason for the Monomyth's spread in those times, because it was a structure that pleased rulers, and you don't want to piss those people off. Okay, but what about masculine? Alright, this was not nearly as big a deal for me as the other two. Just that by virtue of a lot of male storytellers throughout history, the Monomyth comes largely from a male point of view. Campbell himself said, All the great mythologies and much of the mythic storytelling of the world are from the male point of view. When I was writing The Hero of a Thousand Faces and wanted to bring female heroes in, I had to go to fairy tales. These are told by women to children, and you get a different perspective. It was the men who got involved in spinning most of the great myths. The women were too busy. They had too damn much to do to sit around thinking about stories. And I'm not entirely sure where Campbell gets this idea that men in ancient history sat on their hands and came up with stories rather than breaking their backs growing crops to pay off the insane taxes for those God-ordained leaders. But it's from this perspective that Campbell laid out the monomyth, and thus it's highly masculine. Oh, and some people thought I meant the monomyth was patriarchal, which is not what I meant at all, but me versus the patriarchy is a whole other video. As for Western, Campbell himself asserted that there was a west to east cultural flow that started off in ancient Egypt and spread itself over Asia. To me, this strikes me as fairly Eurocentric, trying to find familiar images in our own culture and others. The first major example Campbell gives in the book The Mask of God, Volume 2, Oriental Mythology, is that people were buried alive in Egypt, and then 4,000 years later, kings in India had suicidal rituals. Well, whoop-de-doo, I guess. So to summarize, Campbell was about attaching human psychology to myth, but his studies ignored the practical history of these stories. He seemed to misunderstand historical gender roles and sought patterns where they didn't exist. That's what's informed the monomyth, a supposed superior structure. Again, I want to stress, the monomyth is not a bad structure, just grossly overvalued by a guy people seem to take seriously for some reason. Point 3. Star Wars is more than the hidden fortress in space. Well, yeah, which is why I prefaced that statement by saying it was a gross oversimplification. Yes, there is a bit of film western in there, a bit of Flash Gordon serial in there, a bit of the Dam Busters in there, but that's more related to the specific details than the core structures of the film. To his credit, Lucas tends to wear his influences on his sleeves rather than pretend he's a storytelling genius, even though I think this is part of the problem when it came to people trying to emulate Star Wars' success. It's hard to find anything made after 1977 concerning the monomyth or Joseph Campbell that doesn't bring up Star Wars. Let me take this opportunity to say what my major influences are on these monomyth videos. Philip Sandifer, David Brin, and Film Crit Hulk. Point 4. 2001: A Space Odyssey isn't a house story. It can be done as a fantasy. Also, it's soft sci-fi. No, not really. First, it would never work as fantasy. 2001: A Space Odyssey is about very specific scientific concepts of evolution, space travel, and computer technologies, and how they are utilized by people. Probably one of my favorite ways to distinct science fiction and fantasy came from a series of Doctor Who analytical books called About Time, written by Lawrence Miles and Tat Wood. There, they suggested that science fiction is about our relationship with our tools, while fantasy is about our relationship with language and symbols. 2001: A Space Odyssey tracks our relationship with our tools from the first Bone Club to deep space exploration and artificial intelligence. Taking this away from 2001 would take away its core. Replacing Hal with a magical beam of light or a cyclops or something, and you've taken away Hal's relationship with his creators, his struggles with self-awareness, and his sly connection to IBM. Okay, but is it hard or soft sci-fi? I'd say that's more arguable with the presence of the monomyth and Dave's final journey to become a star child. Of course, we could hand-wave that away with the old chariots of the god tricks, the suggestion that advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, but I'd rather go the long route. I really don't think a singular, softer element invalidates the harder elements. In fact, if we tried to remove all soft elements, we'd be doing nothing but making NASA mockumentaries speculating on what they might be doing in the next 6 months. There are degrees to hard and soft, and when something is 95% the hardest science fiction ever put to screen, I'm liable to put it in the hard category. And really, a lot of the time, the interesting stuff happens in the juxtaposition, in that place where they meet, how hard speculative fiction with contemporary science reacts to a fantastical or mythical element. There is a reason why a great deal of science fiction around the 50s and 60s, even the really soft ones, starred scientists or astronauts. But this is really all just about categories, more tools in our storytelling toolbox, and we're always looking for new ways to utilize them. Once again, if there's any point I want to get across with these videos, is that there is no one right way to tell a story, and no one should tell you differently. Not me, not your creative writing teacher, not George Lucas, and not Joseph Campbell. All anyone can do is offer more tools for your toolbox, and no tool is more valuable than another. Alright, let the discussion continue, and we'll see if I have to make another one of these.